Joining us today. My name is Maritza Mendoza, and I'm the EJ manager at Empower DC. And yeah, really excited to be with you all today to learn from each other. And so yes, please keep introducing yourself in the chat. We're going to start off with just kind of talking about what cumulative impacts are and why we are using this approach to advance environmental justice. And then we will hear from two guest speakers, Ms. Kim Gaddy from Southward Environmental Alliance in New Jersey, and Carlos Sanchez from the Southward Environmental Alliance and the South Baltimore Community Land Trust in Maryland. And they will share some of their efforts around cumulative impacts. And then we will talk a little bit more about DC's legislation, which is the Cumulative Impacts Analysis Amendment Act of 2025. And you might also know it as the Environmental Justice Amendment Act. And then we'll have time for Q&A and we'll share some next steps. But definitely throughout the presentation, if you have any questions or thoughts, please put them in the chat, and the Empower DC team will try and keep an eye on and flag things that should be addressed right away or wait until the Q&A. Just briefly, Empower DC is a community-based grassroots org that was started in 2003. And just we are really grounded in community organizing and the belief that DC residents, folks most impacted by different issues, should be able to advocate for themselves, should have the resources to be heard. And we really believe that community organizing and building our collective power is how we're going to create systemic change. So our work focuses on housing justice, equitable development, environmental justice, and racial equity. And we know that all of these issues stem from, it can't be solved with one thing. So we really believe in, building collective power to advance systemic change. So today we're talking about cumulative impacts. And before I kind of go into some of these definitions, I'm just curious to know if folks already knew about cumulative impacts before, had heard the term before. So you can either like raise your hand or put an emoji in the chat. I'm just curious to know where folks are at today. And so our cumulative impacts work is embedded in our environmental justice work. And we firmly believe that everybody has a right to a safe and healthy environment where people are protected from disproportionate environmental and human health risks and hazards, and that everyone has the right to determine what a safe and healthy environment looks like. So our cumulative impacts work really seeks to address kind of those two main principles around that no community should be experiencing disproportionate or like an increased amount of harm and health risks as compared to other communities in this case in DC. And so there should not be communities that have more exposure than others. And there should be it should be clear how DC residents determine for themselves what they would like to see in their communities, and that should be fundamental. And so we unfortunately know that a lot of our public policy and government processes and decision making were not made with environmental justice in mind. There was a lot of discrimination and racist decisions that created what we see today. And so our cumulative impacts work is kind of a way to address some of those legacies and ongoing environmental injustices. to define cumulative impacts is kind of the combined chemical and non-chemical stressors on a community's health, well-being, and quality of life. So this phrase really seeks to make sure that we're considering everything that's going on in a community before decisions are made, before, for example, more pollution is permitted and allowed in a community. And so from our work in environmental justice in DC, we know that current laws do not take into account this holistic view of what's already causing harm in a community. And so that is, that's not right, that's unjust. And that's kind of what we seek to change with this bill. And so I will pass it over to Miss Sabrina to kind of ground us in how we started in this work. And yes, we'll keep going.
Thanks, Marisa. Well, Ivy City is a historic Black community. This year makes Ivy City 151 years old. We have not only in Ivy City, but in Brentwood and Ward 5, we bear the brunt of all of the industries, the polluting industries. And in Ivy City alone, we have half of the community that's industrial, and we do have chemical and non-chemical stressors, and our quality of life has been threatened by these stressors. We also have a lack of green space, so we suffer from a urban heat island effect. So if you ever come out to Ivy City, you will experience the heat, which is 10 to 20 degrees hotter than any community in a district. Also, the lack of green space. The reason why we suffer from the urban heat island effect is because we don't have green space. We have some trees, we have some invasive species, but not enough to create shade. And that's something that we're fighting for. We're fighting for shade. We're fighting for basic things that other communities take for granted, like trees and grass. Play space for children, and a play space with a canopy over it, and maybe, some grass for the kids to roll in. Some communities have all of that. We have a basketball court, which is hot. We have a playground, which is hot. But we don't have the much needed shade like majority of the communities in the district have. We have an unpermitted chemical facility, NEP. Anybody that has been hanging with us know we want to shut down the National Engineering Products. They don't have a air permit, air quality permit, and they're still operating today. They've been here since the 30s. They've been operating since the 30s, and they're using cancer-causing chemicals. So not only don't we have green space, or trees or grass, we have a chemical facility, and we have a lot of other facilities that's because of the racist land use decisions, we're just overburdened community. And we're suffering from the cumulative impact of a lot of these businesses. And what's interesting, they're continuously putting those businesses, more businesses in our community. So therefore, they're not even checking out the Ivy City small area plan, or just listening to the community and the residents. We live here, we're a people, and we have a voice, and they're not listening. So yeah, they're continuously putting in more industrial uses. So thank you. And if you have any questions, you can put them in the chat.
Yes. Thank you, Ms. Sabrina, for sharing that background. So yeah, I failed to mention that we work really closely in Ward 5 in Ivy City and Brentwood because of what Ms. Sabrina just shared. Um, uh, Most of DC's industrial land is sited in Wards 5, and then additional land is in Ward 7 and 8. And so these communities face the brunt of the hazards that come from being close to industry and all the health impacts. And you know, even with current laws and regulations, as Ms. Sabrina just shared, those laws are not protective enough to prevent further harm from coming to, for example, Ivy City or other communities like Brentwood. And so, you know, without explicit laws and policies that actually prevent further harm and undo the harm that has happened, then this, you know, will continue to happen. And so just to reiterate what Ms. Sabrina was saying is a lot of the pollution sources currently are evaluated by themselves, so they're evaluated individually. And so, for example, if we were thinking of like the like a bus terminal and the permit to have a gasoline fueling station, the only things that the DC agencies would consider would be just like what happens when you what are the things that are emitted from this fueling station. So they don't look at like the traffic that might increase. They don't look at existing industrial uses in the area. And so again, without looking at a holistic, comprehensive view of pollution, then it will continue to exacerbate harms. And another thing I just want to highlight is that we know climate change is here and it is causing a lot of environmental stressors to get worse. And so again, this doesn't make sense to think about pollution in like a single issue kind of way, because we know that pollution interacts and gets worse with different things. For example, like ozone is a combination of two different kinds of chemicals and heat. And so again, if we're only thinking about one thing at a time, we're not going to see those interactions. We're not going to fully understand the impacts from like one kind of source of pollution. And so yeah, lastly, I think just want to acknowledge that thinking of cumulative impacts is also just another way to think about community health. So we're learning about the stressors that are in a community, but all in a way to kind of figure out different avenues to address those harms, to think about how we can improve community health in small ways and then, you know, bigger ways. And so, yeah, this is really just another way to think about how we improve the health in overburdened communities. And so with that, I will introduce our speakers for the day. And so I will introduce both speakers and then I'll hand it over to Ms. Kim to take it away. And so Ms. Kim Gaddy is the founder and executive director of the South Ward Environmental Alliance. She has been fighting for environmental justice in the goods and freight movement for 25 years. She led grassroots campaigns and coalition building efforts in New Jersey and across the nation. Her leadership roles include former Newark School Board member, Port Commissioner for the City of Newark, first chair of the Newark Environmental Commission, chair of the New Jersey's Environmental Justice Advisory Council, which is appointed by governors. And she's also a founding member of the New Jersey Environmental Justice Alliance and serves as president and CEO of the International Black Women's Congress. And in 2023, she received an NAACP award for her community service, which adds to her numerous accolades. So thank you so much for being here with us and for sharing your insights with us. And then we also have Carlos Sanchez, the youth outreach specialist at South Baltimore Community Land Trust. Carlos is a youth leader and South Baltimore resident focusing on citywide outreach and education to connect more residents with the movement to create community-owned development in Baltimore. As a student at Benjamin Franklin High School in Curtis Bay, Curtis started learning from environmental justice leaders who founded Free Your Voice. Carlos acted on these lessons by helping to develop Baltimore's first citywide zero waste plan and advocated for new funding for permanently affordable community-owned development. And now Carlos continues to advance environmental justice through research and action while expanding our outreach to the next generation of youth leaders. Thank you, Carlos, for being here as well. We're excited to learn from you. And so with that, I'm gonna pull up Ms. Kim's slides, but feel free to get started.
Yeah, well, thank you, Hotep, and welcome to you all. This is a very important topic. As was stated, I'm Kim Gaddy, founder and executive director of the Southward Environmental Alliance. I live in the great city of Newark, New Jersey. The South Ward is 1/5 of our city. We have about 80,000 residents and 3 different distinct neighborhoods. Our backyard, unfortunately, is home to the second largest port in the United States. The first largest port is in LA. So on a daily basis, we have cumulative impacts of pollution coming not only from our port and the 25 to 30,000 trucks that come in and out of that port on a daily basis. We have our airport. We are bound by rails, 6 different highways, 1 Superfund site, and this is all in a Dayton Street neighborhood of like a 10-block radius. So the cumulative impacts of pollution that we suffer from is harming our communities. And so Newark, just like Baltimore, just like DC, and any community where Black and brown individuals reside, you will see and hear the same stories where low-income people, marginalized individuals reside. They are the dumping grounds and cumulative impacts of pollution we are suffering from on a daily basis. And so our fight started out because, unfortunately, as a mother of 3 asthmatic children, I was working in municipal government for about 11 years. And when I had my daughter, she was diagnosed with asthma, not even one. My youngest son will turn 21 next week. And all 3 of my kids had asthma. And 2.5 years ago, I lost my oldest son to a premature, bless you, heart attack. And so this fight was personal. I got involved because I was concerned not only about my children, but what was happening and why 1 out of 4 children in the city of Newark was suffering from asthma. Our seniors was dying from premature cancers and respiratory illnesses at an extremely high rate. And 7 miles away in Livingston, an affluent community in the state of New Jersey, 1 out of 10 children suffer from asthma. And so I knew then that it was only because of the color of our skin and the zip code that we reside in that our health was impacted by this pollution. And so I began to work for Clean Water Action, and I worked for them for about 23 years. I was the environmental justice organizer and then the national environmental justice director until I founded my organization and became full-time in May. And Clean Water Action, New Jersey Environmental Justice Alliance, Ironbound Community Corporation. We were the leading organizations that was fighting for the cumulative impacts law in the state of New Jersey, which, even though it's weak in some areas, it is recognized as the strongest environmental justice law in the nation. And our fight took 12 years. Yeah, you could, while I'm talking, you can go to the next slide. It took actually 12 years. And so I'm going to talk about our executive order, what actions we took, and how we was able to pass the policy. And so when you think about fighting for environmental justice, you're in it for the long haul. So I commend you right now. It's not going to happen tomorrow. You have to begin to gain the environmental champions who will have the political will to do what's right by the people, to do what's right by the most marginalized communities. And so when we began this fight, now it's 15 years ago, but it was 12 years since when we had the law passed in 2020, we would go and meet with different legislators, different senators and assembly members, and they would say, okay, this is important. Oh, we don't have the votes. Oh, then the next session will come in. Oh, this is important. We don't have the votes. And so what we decided to do at the time, Cory Booker was the mayor of the city of Newark, and I was the chair of the Environmental Commission. I said, listen, let's take this strategy to the local communities. Let's create local environmental justice, cumulative impact ordinances at the municipal level. So now we could garner the support of local mayors, and then we could now get the local mayors to put more pressure on our state assembly and senators. So then we can pass a statewide EJ law. And so we was able to get the city of Newark. Cory Booker started out. By the time Ras Baraka was elected in 2014, we had a cumulative impacts ordinance on the books for the city of Newark. And so that meant that now we was able to lift up what we can do in the city of Newark to these state representatives. We had other individuals who was working in Camden. Camden was creating a cumulative impact ordinance. We went up to Patterson. We was in Jersey City, and we was just trying to talk it up to community, because we know that the power is vested in us, in the community. But we have to be able to organize, educate, inform those elected officials, because they are disconnected from the environmental issues that we're dying from. When I left municipal government as a chief of staff to the council president, my senator said, Kim, why are you leaving City Hall to go hang out with tree huggers who don't even look like you? I was like, whoa. This is I love trees, but this ain't about trees. This is about people's lives. But that's the mentality, unfortunately, that some of our elected officials had when it came to the environment. They didn't even know what environmental justice was. It took me about 7 years to get Cory Booker to understand and to really begin to fight. And now, at least as a senator representing the state of New Jersey, he is speaking to the issues that's most important to us. And so you have to be able to be in it for the long run. But at the same time, you have to galvanize and organize your base. And along the way, create environmental champions who understand why you need this law passed. You have to get them to understand that the lives of their constituency is impacted by the cumulative impacts of pollution. And so we understood that we had to have a seat at the table. We had to be a part of the narrative, right? Because we know that no one was coming to save us in our communities. We had to save ourselves. And so we was able in 2020 to get, 2018 to get Governor Murphy. He initially signed an Executive Order 23, and this was before the cumulative impact law was actually voted on, because they felt as though while we was working through the language, they didn't want a lot of polluting entities to just kind of flood the gates and come and get permits in before the actual law. So they created an executive order in 2018, which gave the DEP guidance to direct the executive branch on how to consider their regulatory responsibilities on these companies. Next slide. And so it was like a stopgap, right? And this guidance was a part and a response to us pushing DEP to do something. And so they created guidance called Furthering the Promise, a guidance document for advancing environmental justice across the state government, because we found out that there was individuals within different departments that didn't even understand how environmental justice was connected to all of the different departments. They had this silo approach. And we're like, you can't have a silo approach when you are looking at cumulative impacts of pollution from our water, from our air, right? From everything that you're dealing with. Next slide. And so this guidance was something that helped them. And it was the first step to getting our government to identify not only what the community of concern was, the absence of environmental and public health benefits, and then the presence of disproportionate environmental and public health stresses. And so it was 3 criteria that they identified in this guidance. And so that was kind of their 3 buckets. They looked at the EJ communities at the core and said, what are some of the concerns? What are the stresses that is causing this? And then what do we need to do to protect the health, right? Next slide. And so from this guidance, a conversation began to talk. We began to also now utilize our environmental justice mapping assessment and protection tool that they provided. Next slide. And again, all of this was to educate the staff of the DEP, whose responsibility is to protect the health of the residents, right? And so we began to have this whole conversation on which New Jersey entities do work that implicates, environmental justice. Like, let people see what is out there. We know we had our DEP. What enforcement initiatives was out there? We know we had an Environmental Justice Advisory Council that was actually founded under Lisa Jackson, who was our DEP commissioner, and then she became the commissioner of the EPA under the Obama's administration. The Board of Public Utilities, they have a major role in EJ work in our communities. Our New Jersey Economic Development Authority, right? Department of Community Affairs, when you're talking about lead remediation, abatement, utility and energy bill assistance, weatherization programs, that Department of Community Affairs in our state was deeply engaged in that. And then, of course, the Department of Health, the environmental and occupational health with their surveillance and assessment, right? And so we had to get them to kind of understand who needed to be a part of this work from a statewide perspective. And then at the county and municipal level, we all know, again, our work is local, right? We need to be able to engage locally. So we had to make sure we had county and a municipal level plan. So the counties and municipalities, they had various agencies and departments that provide services that affect the conditions in our community. And some of these entities could include like our public works departments, utility authorities, entities overseeing your water quality, waste management, housing and economic development departments. And so we wanted to put all this information into a database so that if anybody needed to find something, they knew where to go, right? Next slide. And so after all that and 12 years of fighting, we was finally able to get a governor who supported the idea of having an environmental justice cumulative impacts law. Governor Murphy. We was able to get Senator Troy Singleton, who represented the South Jersey part of New Jersey, to be our lead senator on the bill. Teresa Ruiz, who represented Newark, was a key sponsor. And we was able to finally get those individuals to take that step and that political will to sign our environmental justice law in 2020. And although when we signed the law in 2020, the regulations were supposed to come 1 year after that. The regulations didn't come to 2 years after that. and then it was finally adopted in 2023. So we are just now going through hearings and processes and we actually just put in 100-page testimony against a company under the New Jersey environmental justice law. And what our law specifically, the requirements of it is that the permit applicants must prepare an environmental justice impact statement. That was never something that they had to do. Engage directly with members of their proposed host community. So if you're proposing a facility in North New Jersey, you can't go get some folks from Camden or Jersey City. No, you got to get the representatives from Newark, the host community involved, because that's what they do too. They go outside and get some people to come in and say, oh, this is the best facility in the world, right? But we know that the voices that matter are those individuals who live within those communities. And then they have to collect public comments and respond to them in writing. And so we know that that might be a hit or miss, but we're going to pressure those individuals to comply with the requirements. And then we always felt that the Department of Environmental Protection had the authority, right, to deny permits. But they kept saying, we don't have the power. So we had to create this law, which I always thought they had the power. And so it requires DEP to evaluate whether pollution from the proposed facility will cause or contribute to environmental and public health stressors at levels disproportionate to those in less burdened communities. Very important. Where disproportionate impacts are not avoidable, DEP could limit certain new facilities or subject existing facilities to additional permit conditions that reduce environmental and public health stresses affecting the community. That's important. When you look at shaping your cumulative impact law, what are those stresses that you are going to identify? What do they look like? And then how can they how can your DEP be put in a situation where they can ensure that those folks are in compliance? I think it's one more slide, another slide. Yeah. Okay. And then there are 8 different types of facilities that are covered under our New Jersey environmental justice law. Major sources of air pollution, i.e. gas-fired power plants and cogeneration facilities in the city of Newark. We have the largest, largest, oh God, incinerator in the Northeast, right? They changed the name to some weird name, but it was called Covanta, and now I think it's called ReWorld. And it is just a major polluter. We take garbage from half the state of New Jersey, half the state of New York, right? It's just crazy. Resource recovery facilities or incinerators, sludge processing facilities, sewage treatment plants with a capacity of more than 50 million gallons per day. So when you're looking at your sewage treatment plants, you want to look at what that capacity is. Transfer stations or solid waste facilities, you know, we have hundreds of them in our community. Recycling facilities, at least 100 tons of recyclable material per day. Scrap metal facilities, we have one of the largest recycling medical facilities in the world is located in the South Ward and the Ironbound and at the port. And that's not by happenstance. It's in 2 communities of minority Black and brown individuals. Landfills, medical waste incinerators, this was something that was a struggle. Except those that are attended to hospitals and universities, they have to be included in this. And so it was always, it's a challenge with some of the medical facilities, right? And so in your case, you got to really look at that. But we wanted to list it so that, you know, if for some reason we can't win in some cases when it's medical waste, we want to make sure that at least our community understands what these facilities have, right? Because oftentimes you don't even know what the waste is, and you can't even have a conversation with them. And so advocates, permit applicants, and DEP can use this DEP's environmental justice mapping, assessment, and protection tool to identify all of the overburdened communities throughout the state of New Jersey. And so we actually have a map that identifies that. And from your previous slides, I don't think it would be difficult for you all to create that. And I know you have some tools in DC that are quite similar to what we use. Next slide. I think that was it. I think
Yes.
that's my 10 minutes, right? So thank you for allowing me to come and share, our body of work with you all. And I will type my information in the chat so that if you also want to reach back out to me, you can. Thank you, Maritza. Appreciate it.
No, thank you so much for sharing those thoughts. I definitely think we resonated with a lot of what you shared. And so if definitely people have questions, please put them in the chat. But I would love to hand it over to Carlos now to share a little bit about what's happening in Maryland.
Yep. Thank you, for giving me the opportunity to speak with you all today. Sorry, just pulling up the slides now. Or trying to at least. Everybody can see my screen okay? Yep. Okay, awesome. Yeah, so thank everyone for allowing me to speak here tonight, and just wanted to share about a lot of what we've been working on, and overall, SPCLT along with other community groups in Maryland have been working has been working on community impact policy for decades. In our center, it started back when in almost a decade ago, when a group of students, who attended the local high school I attended, Benjamin Franklin High School, they came together after hearing about a proposal that was good for the nation's largest trash incinerator to be built less than a mile away from their school. And at first they couldn't believe it, that it was something that they were even considering, because there was already so many polluting facilities in that area alone. Then Curtis Bay alone, there is around 70 to 100 stationary pollution sources. There is a landfill, there is another already trash incinerator called Bresco. There is a medical waste incinerator, there is a petroleum management company, there is an open air CSX coal terminal. So, they were thinking that there was no way they were going to consider this or even let it happen, right? There had to be some sort of law in place to address this and to prevent this from happening. And ultimately, they found out that there wasn't, right? So they took it upon themselves to successfully shut down that proposal, and then moving into the other facilities that are in that area, knowing that there is so many facilities to address at once. It's going to take quite some time to do that individually or do it one by one. And knowing that it's not just in South Baltimore, but it's across the state of Maryland, right? And so the Cherish Act is one of the latest examples of our work on getting community impact policy in Maryland. And for those who may not know, it stands for the Cumulative Harms to Environmental Restoration for Improving Shared Health, and being called Cherish Our Communities Act. And it's a wonderful name. I helped come up with it, but going on, that's kind of where we started, decades of organizing and decades of talking to community members and seeing what is it that's going on in other communities and not just in South Baltimore. And so, like I was saying earlier, a lot of communities across the state of Maryland, a lot of it, there have been overburdened with pollution by decision being made by our local, state, and federal governments, which led to so many communities being overburdened with pollution. And this picture specifically is about a neighboring community in South Baltimore, which was close to Curtis Bay. And this was a neighborhood called Fairfield. And this was the last standing home that, was actually got torn down back in 2016 for the same reason that, community members were forced out of their homes because the pollution was so bad. And so this is what the Cherish Act is supposed to help, right? Those communities that are overburdened with pollution. And it was in order to reduce the harms and share the benefits of industrial activity for communities that are being overburdened with such facilities, right? But specifically, what this law allowed was for permits to be denied in certain cases while requiring a cumulative impact mitigation fund agreement in others. That way, whatever those facilities are wanting to operate in the already overburdened community will have to pay some sort of fee or mitigation fund that will go towards what the community needs to help balance those negative impacts. And so, we were using and we were getting input from multiple communities across the state of Maryland because there was a lot that wanted to be addressed, right? There is a lot of things that, communities really wanted to make sure that was included in this bill, and making sure that, not just worrying about new permits, right? But they also were worrying about, facilities are already there, right? Not just new permits, we were talking about expansion permits and renewals for air, land, and water, right? Those are things that a lot of communities throughout the time of organizing, really expressed their concerns about. And, we've even, we looked into examples of cumulative impact bills that were and policies that were happening in other states, New Jersey being one of them. And so, we really wanted to get a sense of what was going on, what was already working, what was already happening in other states that we can have in our state as well, in our communities. And one of them was actually having the EBR report, or existing burning report, that will address that will have to be able to see what is going on in an area, right? It's just like New Jersey, what Ms. Kim was saying earlier, right? A lot of these facilities are being looked at individual permits, right? And not taking into consideration that there is already 70 to 100 facilities in one given area. And so when we were developing this bill, it was really community driven, right? It was making sure that it covered all the overburdened, overpolluted facilities, overburdened, communities, sorry, and really making sure that, it was going to cover, it was a core principle, it was going to cover what communities were asking for, right? We did not want a bill that was going to say, yeah, this is what it's supposed to be doing, but surprise, it's not actually going to protect whatever you guys want to protect, and it's not going to address what you guys are wanting to address. And so we wanted to really have those have community voices in the table to make sure that it's all being driven by community, and making sure that this bill will be meant to protect those this bill was created for, which was the health of the communities and community members. And so, ultimately with this existing burning report that we were having into this bill was to help inform Maryland Department of Environment, which is our environmental controlling agency, to inform decisions to either accept or deny permits, right? Or even require, if by complete necessity, that it has to be here in this community, and there is no reasonable alternative for location or other facility, it would require a community benefits agreement that will ultimately help the community. And, that was one of the, major obstacles that we faced trying to pass this bill, which was, administration prioritizing an exemption for port businesses that will, ultimately include most of the polluting facilities in Baltimore, and that communities are most concerned about, right? And those are one of the things that we did not want to compromise in, right? And just to get something passed. So ultimately, we agreed that it's better to withdraw the bill than to pass something that was going to be ultimately weak and not be fulfilling and protecting the communities. And so that's where we've been, that's what we need to keep doing now, which is like pushing and keep building that coalition so that we can overcome those challenges, and making sure that we can create and pass a bill with the core principles of protecting the community and making sure that it addresses the harms that the communities across the state of Maryland want to address. And I'm pretty sure that's all the slides I have for today. But I'm happy to answer any questions or anything need clarification. And again, thank you all for having me.
Yes, thank you, Carlos, for sharing. Yeah, I definitely think we should give some space for questions. So I see some in the chat, but if anybody has one, feel free to raise your hand as well. And so I see a question that says for Ms. Kim, did you experience hesitations, concerns from the government about government liability that would come from the EJ law? How did you navigate?
Yeah, I was answering in the chat. The DEP knew that they would be lawsuits, but they felt that the law is strong enough, is on their side, that when they come to, of course, come to sue the state, that the law is strong enough that the state would be victorious in denying those permits. It's really, you know, you're always going to get these industry folks they don't want to change. Like they always want things on how it was. And so one of the other question was they felt that the business developers, they felt that the law was too strict, that it was overly burdensome, it would delay the permitting, that it would not want companies to come and develop. So they use all these kind of tactics to attack the financial and economic viability, which kind of shook some of our supporters for a moment. And to DEP said, no, that's not correct. And so they have to stand strong and firm. The supporters that you have, they can't shake, right? When the industry and the business folks come at them, because they came at us. I mean, we had hearings that lasted 12 hours, right? Had to stop and start the next day. And they just line up all their members to come and speak, line up, and then, try to get the legislators, because they back them financially, to buckle. And so just trust and believe that whatever law you come up with, that is strong enough to uphold against any legal lawsuit. And that's what we're standing on ground. And right now, there hasn't been any, but the jury's still out.
Yes, thank you. And yeah, I just wanted to I really appreciate both of you talked about just the need to build community power and to build coalitions. It's really clear that there will always be, folks, as you both said, who do not have our best interests in mind, and what we need to do to overcome them is to just show up with more power, and show that we can overcome. And so I'll do one question before we go into a little bit about DC's bill. I'm just trying to read. So I can do the first one for Carlos. It says, how have you and your team been going about fighting companies' requests for exemptions so far? And what strategies have been more or less successful?
Yeah, and good question. Sorry, I was trying to type the
No
answer.
worries.
But yeah, I mean, ultimately what we've been making sure is that we set from the beginning as a group of a coalition alongside community members, is making sure that we set up a core principles that we wanted the bill to cover, and making sure that and kind of ranking them in a way where it's like this is things that we could negotiate on, and things that might not be that the communities of course are all on board with, and there are some things that we will not in no way will we compromise this for any reason. And ultimately that was kind of the framework that we were using, and making sure that you know that we get to cover keep the core purpose of the bill, which was to protect communities. For the most part, I think that ultimately we did pretty good on making sure that trying to putting pressure on things that we did not want to compromise in. And I think that was one of the things that one of the strategies that was really more successful, which was for example, a lot of one of the things that when we were drafting this bill there was a little bit of pushback, which was the renewal permits. One of them was it was like maybe not considering them, or taking them out of the bill completely. And ultimately, we were kept on making like putting that pressure on, like, no, there's not something, we can't just exclude permits, because then this bill is only good for those that are coming in. But what about the ones that's already been there? That all those facilities that the communities want to address. And ultimately we settled on making sure that those renewal permits were there, that wouldn't take an effect until like 1 or 2 years later. But especially it's going to be more effective for facilities that already had a history of violations of polluting. And ultimately that's something that a lot of the community members were you know agreeing with. And that kind of goes on to like the second. I hope that answers your question. But and that kind of goes into the second question I saw in the chat, which was like how community involvement works in this. And it's ultimately having it in the beginning, and making sure that there is those voices there throughout the process, and making sure that we get every input that for all communities that are sharing not everybody will agree on it, but making sure that those principles are still there that would benefit the community. And making sure that like I said, we've been doing this kind of work for decades now, so we were getting that input from way before we started drafting the bill. And so yeah, I'm gonna end it there in case for the sake of time.
Okay, so I realize we don't have that much time left, but this has been really helpful. And I do, I see Parisa put a question in the chat that I'm curious about as well. So I guess, yeah, I'll just briefly talk about DC's bill. And it might seem very familiar to New Jersey's, because we did use New Jersey's bill as kind of a foundation. And again, I think what we really want to do is require facilities to do this work to address like what their impact is in overburdened communities, and what the how are they proposing to mitigate, and to really be clear about those impacts. The bill also creates avenues for the public to call for a hearing on a proposed project. So after the cumulative impact statement is created and released for the public to review, there is a way for, if I think it's if 25 people have some concerns, they are able to call for a hearing. So again, this is kind of a way to make sure that the public can participate in these permitting processes, and that there's more avenues instead of having to just wait for hearings to maybe be scheduled, or to wait to learn about what's going on. And then, yeah, and so these are some other things about the Office of People's Counsel being able to initiate civil action. So again, if an impacted resident or impacted group of residents are adversely affected by a decision, then they could file an action against to protest, or try and stop the decision from moving forward. And then the last thing I just want to mention is that it creates environmental justice division, which I think will hopefully address some of the siloing that we've heard today, and also create more transparency with impacted residents to learn about what's happening and be a part of these permitting processes. So I think since because of time, we might skip this, but this is kind of how we were defining overburdened communities in the bill. But yeah, I think I will like open it up to questions. I think these were some questions that I was just thinking of, like what else should this bill address? And maybe this is where Paris's question of, community benefits agreements, what else needs to be a part of this bill to not just address stopping the harms, but if something does have to happen, are there ways to mitigate and make sure that they're being held accountable for what they're doing? So I'm gonna stop, or yes, I guess if Carlos or Miss Kim could answer Pyrese's question, and then I think we'll open it up for final questions.
And what question was that? Did you?
If air quality monitoring plays a role in your policy work, for example, we were thinking of requiring fence line monitors at facilities. So yes.
Yes, definitely. We have been using perforator monitors with the help and support of Dr. Jacoby Wilson down in Maryland. We have black carbon monitors and we have amplitudes. We do truck counts. We know how important it is because the data helps us in our fight. We know our lived experiences is what they should be looking at, but oftentimes they say, what does the data say? And so when you want to capture the air pollution at that hyper local level, then the air monitoring is a key way, and that has helped us tremendously in our community. So that definitely that's a way to go.
Are there other questions from folks? I'm going to, I see a hand raised maybe. You could, yeah, come off mute.
Right. Would the proposed bill in DC reach NEP, which is grandfathered in?
Question. Go ahead, Parisi.
And this is it. NEP was one of the reasons why the bill was created, but it's a very valid question. It would impact NEP when they are going through some type of permit renewal. As folks have heard us say time and time again, it has no permits. It's been operating without permits. It's now, it looks like on this path that it's soon going to have a permit process. But we're also trying to figure out ways to incorporate zoning and planning into our cumulative impacts bill. So, and I know you've been in some of these conversations, even looking at, the comprehensive plan and the land use maps and figuring out other ways that we can also start to, from a zoning and planning perspective, limit the amount of industrial sites in neighborhoods. So I think we're going to have to use multiple strategies to get at problem actors like NEP. But I just want to say thank you so much to our speakers. We've learned a lot from your experience. We're going to be, I think, asking you a lot more questions as our bill continues to evolve, and definitely want to really look at the community benefit agreements component that you talked about. Miss Gaddy, you just mentioned truck counts. That's another thing I think we want to look at, you know, how you guys are collecting data, how that data is really true to the communities and not, you know, how it is like hyper local and really representative of what's happening in on a block by block basis, and not just from like some kind of citywide monitor that, you know, doesn't really represent the grassroots level. But thank you guys so much for your information.
Yes, thank you so much for sharing. I do see we're like over time, so I want to respect people's time, but I see, Frederick, if you have more questions, please, I think we could share maybe contact. I know Miss Gaddy shared some, so hopefully we can answer your questions afterwards. But yeah, I look forward to working with you all more, and please let us know if, you know, what resonates or what doesn't, because we definitely want to hear more from impacted residents on how to make this bill actually effective. So I think I'm gonna end the call. Sorry we couldn't get to everything.
No, you're good. I appreciate you. I'll follow up via email. Thanks again.
Okay,
Thanks, everybody.
You,
Have a
thank
good night.
you.
Thanks.
thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.